Hi everybody, my name is Ryan Meehan, and today I'll be talking to you all about zoos. So zoos have been a part of our culture for over 4,500 years, a form of it at least, like animal keeping. And today we use pets such as dogs and cats and hamsters, guinea pigs, and so on. But back in the day they used sheep and cattle and donkey, horse for both social and economic prosperity. So animal keeping has been known throughout our entire civilization. Um, but now, in today's society, there's a lot of environmental issues going on. There's climate change, global warming, deforestation, desertification, land use, and overpopulation. So all of these environmental issues are having a huge impact on our wildlife and our animals. It's forcing these animals to um, disperse from their normal or actual habitat, and they have to find and adapt to a new environment or a new habitat. And it's hard for them. A lot of them are going extinct, or a lot of them are being endangered, or just at risk. So zoos starting 1970 have decided to um, captivate these endangered animals and try to breed them and reintroduce them back into the wild. Um, However, these actions have brought attention to both animal rights activists and wildlife conservationists to protest and preach why it's unethical to captivate these animals. So, in order to look at the ethics of the zoo, we have to figure out the functions of a zoo first. So, there's four functions of the zoo. There's amusement purposes, educational purposes, research purposes, and conservation purposes. So, we'll look to the pros and cons and weigh out the differences between between the two. So we'll do the pros first. So the main pro or the main strength of zoos is the amusement purposes. 700 million people annually visit zoos and aquariums. So that's a lot of people, and these people are going just for the animals, and they want to see like sea lion shows and tiger feedings, and they want to pet the farm animals. Um, these amusement activities is what gathers all the tourists and the attraction. Um, so another big part of this strength is the education part of it. So when people go see these animals, there's always descriptions of the animals, and they're able to learn about how these animals survive, what they do at night, what do they eat, um, stuff like that. So there's a lot of educational insight inside the zoos that not just children but everyone likes to read and enjoy. Next is the vet care. If an animal gets sick or is injured, there's many vets in each zoo to help these animals to make sure they're treated the best way they can be with the environment that they're in. And lastly is the economic boost. The zoos donate to the wild conservation, and they donate about $350 million every year. And not only do they help the wild animals that are endangered, they also help the local businesses, so the tourists that are going to the zoos. It helps prosper the economy in the local area, and also provides jobs for the workers and etc. So looking at the strengths, we'll now look at the weaknesses, and the main weakness is what causes all the ethic controversy is animal rights. So the animal rights idea is that the zoos are captivating these animals, and they're taking them out of their environment that they're used to and putting them pretty much in a trapped, either caged or glass enclosed area, which affects them not just physically but behaviorally and emotionally and psychologically. So that brings us to the next con of zoos is the health impairments or the health causes it has on these animals. So an animal like the bear or bears, they are known to migrate. So when they are taken from the wild and they're put into zoos, they totally forget the idea of hibernation, and it messes their whole schedule up and their whole environment and habitat up. So it alters in a lot of behavioral aspects. Their mood changes, they become very aggressive, and they have a lot of mood swings. They can be very just calm it, and then in 1 second they can be very angry and have tempers. So the idea of taking animals and confining them into areas really affects their behaviors and their psychological and physical beliefs. But next is not only It's just the animals that are captivated, but also the offsprings have a hard time being reintroduced into the environment or the wild, because starting in a zoo and like being born in the zoo, they are they learn that the humans are the ones that feed them, and the humans are the one that clean them and clean their environment. So if they're thrown into the wild, they're not going to know how to be independent because they have been relying on these zookeepers for such a long time, that and it's just a drastic change that they could be either eaten by prey or they'll have a hard time finding prey for their own. Um, but yeah, so those are the main cons of the zoos. But now we'll get into the philosophical thinkers and their perspective on animal rights and um, wild conservation. So we'll start with Tom Regan. So Tom Regan was one of the leaders for the animal rights movement, and he brought up the idea of the subject of life criterion. So this is basically 4 criteria that is needed to be required by a being, and if the being has all 4 of these requirements, then they are considered a subject of life, or in other words, they have intrinsic or inherent value or worth, meaning that they have an end in themselves. So the first criteria is to be conscious, and the second is to be aware of their surroundings, followed by their relationship between themselves and the surroundings that they are in, knowing what situation they're in pretty much, and lastly is being self-conscious. All these qualities end up being led to having a subject of life, which it turns out every animal does, because they are able to have their own desires and their own thoughts, and aware of their surroundings. So it's good to look at that these animals do have a soul, and they do have the right to think and have desires. So if Regan was to put a stand on the ethical debate of zoos, he would definitely say that it's totally unethical to captivate animals and put them in a zoo. Next is Peter Singer, and Peter Singer is a pioneer of the animal liberation movement, and he believes that all animals are equal. He thinks every animal is capable of living a good life. There should be a quote in this text here. It says, "The suffering we inflict on the animals while they are alive is perhaps an even clearer indication of our speciesism than the fact that we are prepared to kill them." So Singer's quote in his his article, the textbook here, is pretty much that these animals have a right to be free, and by us taking these animals and putting them into like pretty much an animal prison is way worse than just using preparing to kill these animals for food and for food and other use. So the treatment of these animals is very unjust. And now we'll get into the last movement, which is anthropocentrism. So this is just the idea that the humans are the center of the world and God placed us here because we have the important role of saying what goes for our world. But so humans are the center of the world pretty much. But this is where it comes to my argument, because the zoos is pretty much the epitome of anthropocentrism, because we're honestly just captivating animals and trapping them into an enclosed area or glass room or a metal cage, and we're taking we're making them have new physical, behavioral, and psychological aspects to themselves that they never thought they would have before, and it's just a shell shock to them because they're not used to being in an environment like this, and it can be very depressing and hard for these animals. So if you look at a lion, for instance, they are the king of the jungle, and when you captivate one and put it in the zoo, they go from being the king of the jungle, stalking their own prey, to now having to rely on a human to feed them once or twice a day. And it can be very hard for these animals to learn how to cope with the differences in the lifestyle that they have now. So taking the anthropocentric point of view, we need to reuse or rethink of the way that we could use our power in this world that we may have to do what is the best for us all, for the world. So I came up with some solutions that we could maybe incorporate to zoos that can make it more moral and ethical, that there could be a possibility of actually having a zoo that is ethical. So here's what I came up with. The first one is just reducing the amount of species that are there that aren't endangered. So only having the zoos for endangered or species at risk. That way, they can now have more space to be in an area that is environmentally suitable to them, so they can roam around more, and it could maybe make life a bit more normal than it would be having more animals there. Just having less animals so they have more space to roam around could just be a more moral way of inhabiting these animals. Second is by matching these captivated animals with the environment that they appropriately fit with. So, for example, the polar bear is from the Arctic region, which is in Canada, like Alaska, the United States, and Russia. So it would be most appropriate to put a polar bear in a zoo that's located in Canada or Russia, because they'll be able to adapt to the environment a lot easier than putting it in the San Diego Zoo. And then the last solution I have to this problem could also be, instead of focusing on the larger animals that people would be more attracted to visit, you could also try to only focus more on the smaller species like amphibians and reptiles and like endangered species of fish, because one, they are a lot cheaper to take care of, and by using smaller species, you could have a bigger area for them to actually breed and have a chance to reintroduce back into the wild. Since they take up less space, you can make a bigger area for these animals to live in, so they can have a bigger space, and they take up a lot less money. So not only is it cheaper, they take up less space, and lastly, these smaller animals have such a higher and more successful rate of actually being reintroduced back into the wild because of their environment. It's not as harsh as taking a tiger from a jungle and putting it into a trapped metal cage. It's a lot less demanding, and they are able to reproduce and breed faster to be able to reintroduce back into the wild, which is a very good idea if we're trying to protect the actual animals and species. We could definitely impact more species by targeting smaller species like amphibians and reptiles and endangered fish. So those are the solutions that I came up with. But all in all, these animals, they do have desires, and they are aware of their surroundings, and they have their own ability to be self-conscious, so they have a right to be able to be free and make their own decisions because they have instincts as well. The only more option for us is to create an area that is almost exactly, or it mimics the environment that they came from, because if we don't, then they are going to be experiencing behavioral and psychological problems, which we do not want to see in these animals, because then their chances of actually coming back into the wilderness is very unlikely. But the only way we could really put an end to this, reduce these species being endangered or at risk, is by doing our best to reduce climate change, or stop global warming, and recycle, and just everyone do their own part to do what's best for our environment, because by us doing our part, we might not even have to rescue these animals. They could have a chance to live in the habitats that they do live in without any environmental issues, because that is the main issue, that they are the reason, that is the reason why they are being relocated and having to find a new habitat to survive, and it doesn't work out for them all the time. So, thank you.